Hello, this video will review for faculty how to create surveys in Brightspace by D2L. These surveys can be anonymous in nature if you choose. They can also include branching, and so if you're familiar with branching, it is based upon how the student answers a prior question as to what question they are issued next. So that allows them to jump around in the survey based upon or get different questions based upon how they've answered. It can also allow for different types of submissions, so unlimited amount of submissions, one submission of the survey that can be edited, or just one submission of the survey that cannot be edited. It can also allow for students to see the results or the current results of the survey after they submit. First, you would want to navigate to the survey area in your course. So once you are on the home page of your course, you would choose Tools and Resources and then find Surveys. From there, we're going to create a new survey. And you'll see that this looks very similar to the quizzing tool. And again, most of those features are the same. So after giving the course a name, I can choose to categorize it. This is important if you're going to have a lot of different surveys, the same way you might categorize your quizzes if you're going to have a lot of different ones. I'm not going to have too many in this course, so I'm just going to choose to not have a category. This component, the feedback, is related to whether or not the student can see the results of the survey after they submit. So it could be that you don't want them to see that, or it could be that you do want them to see it, but after the survey closes, so you'll issue it to them then, or it could be that as soon as they submit, they can see what other people have said up until that point. But this is what that is speaking to. So I'll select that option now, and I'll show you how to set that up. The next option is whether or not to make this survey anonymous. Now, it is very important that once you select this, you can and save this, you cannot change your mind. You cannot change it back. So if it is built to be anonymous, it will have to stay anonymous. It's also important to know that if a survey is marked as anonymous, D2L does not track who has taken the survey at all. So if you do mark a survey as anonymous, it cannot be used for release conditions, because it's not going to track whether or not the student did it to be able to unlock the next thing that you have set for the release condition. So I'll show you what it looks like with and without being anonymous. I'll go ahead and choose this one as being an anonymous survey for the first time. Then we're going to add and edit questions, and again, this is going to look very similar to the quizzing feature. So here I will choose new, and you can see the different types of question options that I can use for the survey. You see it is very, very similar, and then only the difference here is you cannot mark a correct answer, because obviously there isn't a correct answer with a survey. So then I can choose to save or save and new if I want another question to be populated just like this one, a multiple choice, and be able to fill it in. Or I can save and copy if I'm going to make one very similar to this and I don't want to have to change out all the different components. I can just copy it over and then change out just a couple of the words. It will copy over with the words and all. But in this case, I'm going to choose save because I want to make a different type. Also, at any time as you're building the question, if you want to see what it's going to look like for the students, you can choose preview, and this is how it would look for them and how they would interact with it. Not that the fill in the blank is a common survey type, but it is a little tricky when formatting. So if you do choose the fill in the blank type, under here you would put the text. Text box 1 is what is appearing before the blank, and text box 2 is what is appearing after the blank. So if you have the fill in the blank piece, the last piece of the sentence that they're filling in, you could just put a period here. So for example, it would be, I think this class was blank, period, because the last thing that is being put in is what they're filling in. And again, of course, I can always preview it, and this is what it would look like for the student. So for another take on the fill in the blank, you might have the and then blank, and then the last part would be was my favorite part. So if you preview it here, you would see that it's the blank was my favorite part. So you have before and after the blank. So that's more of a technical piece when you are creating a fill in the blank question, if you happen to use one for a survey. Another common type of question is the Likert scale. And so here you would input your introductory text, such as select the option that most describes you, or something similar to that, to kind of let them know how to answer the scale. Then you can choose how you would like the scale to look and what options you would like on the scale. What you can also do is you can add in your options here and preview it, and then change the scale to kind of see which matches and is going to give you the best results. When you're adding in options, by default you're only given a few. So if you know how many options you want, you can choose that and then add options, and it would go ahead and automatically add you as many spaces as you're going to need to fill in. So in this case, I think it makes sense to use the frequency scale, but I can choose preview to kind of see what it would look like. And you see, using the frequency scale, it gives me these options. Now I can choose to go back, and I might choose to use, the importance scale or another scale. And if I preview it, it would let me see what options are there under that one. So I would encourage you to go ahead and type in the question and the options under your Likert scale, and then just come through here and pick the ones that you think you would like. Also keep in mind that there is the NA option, which might be important depending on the type of question that you're going to be asking for them to choose that NA option. Once we are finished with our questions, we would choose Done Editing Questions. And then we can add in, just like with the quizzes, a introduction or a submission message if we would like to have that in place. If you do use the description, make sure to turn it on so that it will actually be available to the students. So then the next tab will be the restrictions tab of when the survey is going to be open for the students to take. By default, it's going to be hidden, so when you're ready for it to release to the students, make sure you uncheck hide. Then you have the option of the user responses. So you have unlimited, single attempt, or limited. Unlimited is going to let the student respond multiple times. Since it is anonymous, you won't know that a student is responding more than once. The single attempt, it will allow them to submit once, but they can go back and edit it if they mark something and they want to change their mind. Or limited is going to be, and you can put in the number of attempts, just one attempt, two attempt, whatever. It actually does track how many attempts they've taken. There's also the option, like with the quizzes, to allow users special access to the survey. This would be used mainly in cases of the survey has closed for everyone, but you do want to open it up for a particular student. You could come and allow that student to have special access here, just like with the quizzes area, rather than opening it back up to everyone. So if you are not going to allow the students to see the results of the survey as they take it, you're actually done at this point. You could just choose Save and Close, and you would see that your survey is ready. If you are going to allow the students to see the results of the survey, so when you selected and we're setting up the quiz, if you selected to allow them to give that instant feedback, you do want to set up the reports for them to do that. So in this case, we would choose Reports Setup. Keep in mind this part is just optional, and we're going to add a report, and then we're going to choose the report. So you might say survey results, and then you can choose to let them choose what they will be able to see. So in this case, they're probably just going to be able to see the summary report. You can choose to let them see the text responses. Of if you have like a written response, they would be able to see the written responses, or you can choose to just let them see the general responses, the Likert scale, the which selections were chosen most often in multiple select, or true false questions, or whatnot. You probably don't want them to see individual attempts because then they have to look through every single one. Most of the time they're just going to want to see the generalized data, but you can choose to allow them to see individual attempts and hide that information if it was collected in the first place. Then you can choose when it releases to them. So by default, it's going to be immediately, so that as soon as they submit it, they can go and see what others have set up into this point. But if you wanted it to release after the survey ends, you could change and put in a different date. And then you want to choose who's going to be able to see this report. In this case, you want to make sure to choose the student role for the students to be able to see that data. Now that the survey is complete, you can choose to preview it if you like, and this would let you see the questions just as how they would be asked to the students. Another option when adding surveys is the branching option, which means that a student might get different questions based upon how they answer prior questions. So everyone gets question number one. Depending on how you answer question number one, you might jump to number three question or number two question. So it's a great way to allow students to only get questions that apply to them. So for example, I enjoyed the discussion tool in D2L. If they say yes, then they might get a question, what part of the discussion tool did you enjoy? If they said no, there's really no point of them getting the why you enjoyed the discussion tool if they said that they didn't enjoy it in the first place. So that's just an example, but you can set up the branching in your surveys. It's not a requirement, but to do that, you would choose this drop down and do edit, and then you would want to after you've added in your questions, you can choose the branching wizard. By default, if you don't choose this, all students are going to get the same questions in the same order. So they would have all of the, they would have to answer all of the questions. But by turning on the branching wizard, it does let you know of some things that are going to be changing. They will have to answer, it would take off the mandatory status for the questions because they might not get them all. You wouldn't be able to shuffle them because you're setting up the order in branching, and it will take away the ability to add or edit questions. So you do want to make sure that you do have all of your questions added in before you try to set up the branching. So now that we have the branching wizard open, you'll be able to order your questions here. So here's your first question. I think that the discussion tool is I think that the discussion tool is beneficial. So if they answer true on that, what question do they go to next? So if they answer true on that, I want them to go to question number 2, because this one, the first question says, I think the discussion tool was beneficial, and then the number 2 will ask, why or how do you think the discussion tool was beneficial? If they say that the discussion tool was not beneficial, if they say false on that, then I want them to skip number 2 question and jump immediately to number 3 question, since that is not applicable. Number 2 is not applicable to them based upon how they answered question number 1. So then it continues on. So it would be if you answer true, you would get question number 1, then number 2, and then you would go to number 3, and then number 4. If you have it set up where they are going to number 1, if they answer false, they skip to number 3, and then they would go to number 4. So let's look at number 3. So say in this case, what would you like to see more of? Feedback, grades, interactive, or homework? So if they answer feedback, then I just want them to skip to number 5, grades, skip to number 5, homework, skip to number 5, versus interactives, I want them to go to number 4 because I have a question built in about the interactives. So what would you like to see more of in the class? If they choose interactives, they're going to get this question of what specific interactives would you like more of? If they don't choose interactives, they just skip that question and immediately go on down to 5. So this can get very confusing depending on the complexity of how much branching that you're wanting to do. So I would encourage you to kind of type this out on paper or write this out on paper and have it, branched out on there before you actually go and start building. It's also going to be important that you have your survey questions in the correct order, because ordering matters here as to what question is going to come next and what they need to go to next. It's all based upon the order of the questions in the first place. So make sure you have that set up first as well. So we'll save that. And now we are complete with the survey. So for students to get to the survey, they're going to have to go to Tools and Resources and then Surveys by default. It is helpful if you go to the Content area and pull that link in. So if you go to Content and maybe you have a survey module, or maybe you just have one of the first modules in the course set aside for them to do that. And so I would just choose to pull this in, Existing Activities, and then Surveys, and then I would be able to pick the survey to pull it in. Earlier, we talked a little bit about what it would look like for students to be able to see the results of the survey after they submit it. So in this case, where a student that has already submitted, they would click on the link to the survey. It would tell them that they had submitted the max number of times so they could return to the survey list. At that point, after they've completed the survey, they can choose reports in the drop down and then the survey results report that we set up. And then they would choose to generate that, and it would take a second, but it would generate the results for them based upon what had been scored at that point. So we did choose to allow them to see the text responses, so that's why it would let them see that. If we had unselected that, then it wouldn't tell them that. And then they're able to see all the different types of questions that were answered. So really in this case, it is important that you leave this piece anonymous and that you don't allow them to see the results of the survey per person, because they could tie actually that to an individual. So that's what seeing the results of the survey would look like for the students. As the administrator or the instructor of the course, you can choose to see the results by going to the quizzes area here, as well, and choosing either reports or statistics. Really, it's going to give you the same thing, but statistics is the way that you would set it up if you didn't set up reports for your students to see anyways. And this would give you the full information. So we'd be able to see the individual text, we'd be able to see, and this gives us a total as to how many people actually took it. And you'd be able to see, in this case, this means that no one got that question because notice here this was a branching question, and they would only get question 4 if they answered interactives here, and no one did, so that's why they didn't answer that question. And so you're able to see what people have said and see all of that data right within the survey area. So the last thing, if you happen to set up a survey that is not marked as anonymous, when you go to view the statistics, by default, you're going to be able to see what each person said on their attempt. So I can see this student and I can click and see what their survey attempt was, and there may be an appropriate place for that. But then to see that generalized summary of results, you would want to choose View Overall Results, and then it would give you the full results of what everyone had attempted, like we were looking at before. And keep in mind that even if you set up a survey to not be anonymous so that you can see who answered and who said what, if you choose to do reports set up for the students to be able to see the results of the data, and you add a report, just make sure that you only allow for the summary information and not those individual attempts, because if so, then they will be able to see the name of the person who answered each way. And also make sure if you do want them to see the reports at all, that you do select under here to give that instant feedback as an option. And that's how you create surveys within Brightspace by D2L.